One thing you have to understand is that art wasn't always accessible for everyone. One might argue that it still isn't, but that's a conversation for another time. But I'm talking especially before the late 19th, early 20th century. Making art, buying art, spreading your art among the masses, that just wasn't possible for everybody unless you had most likely one of two things. One, a father who was an artist. Most dads like to teach their sons, and in some cases their daughters, their profession, mostly so that they could help out and take over once they, got old or died. An uncle or other family member who was an artist was also a good option. Or option two, a father/family with a lot of money, because in that case they could hire you a private teacher. If you're a rich man and your son shows some interest in the arts and you actually see the value in an artistic education, you might say, sure, I'll pay this artist to teach you how to draw and paint. That was of course less likely if you were a woman, because a lot of fathers in those times would probably expect you to get a man, get some money, and get out. You don't need to be educated in the arts to make a career. You're not supposed to have a career. Sure, I'll let you dabble in a hobby like some needlepoint or the occasional watercolors, but you're not supposed to do this professionally. You're allowed to get just good enough so you can list it among your other abilities when speaking to your future in-laws. Jobs, careers are for men and poor people. That's how a lot of people thought about things in those olden days. So yes, there were less female artists back then, but that doesn't mean there were none. There were a significant amount, we just don't know all of their names. It does, however, mean that yes, those that existed most likely experienced one of those two options, a father who was an artist or a family who could hire a private teacher. The first option was the case for Rosa Bonheur, a name you should know and now will know. She's considered one of the most accomplished female painters of all time, and especially of the 19th century in particular. Her father, Raymond Bonheur, was a drawing master, albeit not a rich and successful one, but he very much encouraged young Rosa to follow her interest in art. From a young age, people considered her a tomboy, and some of her traits and hobbies were considered masculine, like being persistent and stubborn, I guess, and liking to hunt and smoke. Anyway, while her father did influence her becoming an artist, he also left his wife and kids to join a religious community and didn't come back until after his wife had died, at which point he came back to take care of his children, which he did by sending his two sons to boarding schools and his other daughter to live with a family friend, which meant that in the end, Rosa was the only one still living with him. Dad of the Year. So, while he wasn't a great dad, he did encourage her to develop her artistic skill and feel proud to be a woman. And also him neglecting her mother, who was slowly wasting away until she died. It all led to a bunch of different influences in her youth, which combined made her want to be independent and in charge of her own destiny. She saw marriage as a sacrifice of that independence. Now here's where it gets interesting. She had a lifelong platonic union with Nathalie Mikas, a fellow artist who, quoting Linda Nochlund's essay from 1971, provided her with the companionship and emotional warmth which she needed. Obviously, the presence of this sympathetic friend did not seem to demand the same sacrifice of genuine commitment to her profession, which marriage would have entailed. In any case, the advantages of such an arrangement for women who wish to avoid the distraction of children in the days before reliable contraception are obvious. Now, there are a lot of sources I found that kind of dance around this subject that go, yeah, she lived with a woman for most of her life, but moving on, not talking about that. But Rosa Bonheur herself wasn't trying to hide that she lived a life with women. After Nathalie Mikas passed away, she had another relationship with another female painter, the American Anna Elizabeth Klumpke, who, after Rosa's death, became her sole heir. So, not to make any definitive statements, but she also said that the only males she had time and attention for were the bulls that she painted. What a legend. Moving on to her artwork. Her specialty was animal painting, which I know, doesn't sound that exciting at first, but hear me out. You're probably thinking, so what, some French lady painted a bunch of cows? Why should I care? Well, she wasn't just doing your average paint-by-numbers La Vache qui rit in a green field, she was creating artwork that made those French people say, "Oh mon Dieu, la peinture de cette vache est incroyable." And she didn't just paint cows, she also made sculptures. She didn't just paint cows, she also painted a bunch of different animals, even some lions. Yes, lions. But being a woman in any male-dominated field and painting a subject that was typically seen as quite masculine came with its challenges. By the time she had fully honed her skills, people were starting to change from favoriting the history painting and gravitating more towards genre painting, still life, and landscapes. This definitely worked in her favor, as this meant that less grandiose spectacles and more, everyday subjects could be portrayed on the canvas and get the same appreciation of the public. Nice. To quote Linda Nochlin again, in mid-century France, as in 17th century Holland, there was a tendency for artists to attempt to achieve some sort of security in a shaky market situation by specializing, by making a career out of a specific subject. Animal painting was a very popular field, and Rosa Bonheur was no doubt its most accomplished and successful practitioner, followed in popularity only by the Barbizon painter. Rosa Bonheur's naturalism and ability to capture the individuality, even the soul, of each of her animal subjects coincided with the bourgeois taste at the time. And you can confirm this by looking at her work for yourself. The animals look alive, you can tell she's got impeccable knowledge of the way the muscles move underneath the skin and also cause the fur to move. You've got to remember, these are subjects that won't sit still, and in a time before the use of a camera to take reference photos, so she mostly had to rely on a lot of sketches. Sure, you can look at a drawing someone else had made, but the level of detail she shows in her work can only be achieved by endless hours of study. Drawing nude models was taught at art schools, but only to men, and in most countries women weren't even allowed to take classes yet back in Rosa's time. So learning human anatomy at an art school was out of the question. She actually went to the Louvre to copy paintings as a teenager. Later in life she went to livestock sales, horse markets, and slaughterhouses to study these animals and asked for special permission from the police to wear trousers to these events. Yes, she had to ask the police for a permit so she could wear pants. She started dressing like a man, saying it was for practical reasons because pants were easier to move around in and so she could avoid drawing too much attention to herself. At the same time, she still wore dresses for portraits and sort of looked down on other women for their masculine behavior, saying she didn't approve of women who wore men's clothes out of a desire to pass themselves for men. She insisted she only dressed masculine and cut her hair short because of practical reasons, not to make herself look interesting. In her biography, she says, "Remember that at a certain period I spent whole days in the slaughterhouses. Indeed, you have to love your art in order to live in pools of blood. I was also fascinated with horses, and where can one better study these animals than at the fairs? I had no alternative but to realize that the garments of my own sex were a total nuisance. That is why I decided to ask the prefect of police for the authorization to wear masculine clothing. But the costume I am wearing is my working outfit, nothing else. The remarks of fools have never bothered me. Natalie makes fun of them as I do. It doesn't bother at all to see me dressed as a man, but if you're even the slightest bit put off, I'm completely prepared to put on a skirt, especially since all I have to do is open a closet to find a whole assortment of feminine outfits." So she basically said, yes, I wear men's clothing a lot of the time, but only because of practical reasons, because of my work. She was most likely affected by how the world viewed her and wanted to maintain an image in the public eye of someone who could be a feminine woman. She would comment on how impractical skirts would be, but at the same time be like, oh, I love girly stuff, I'm such a girly girl, girl, I'm a girl. So while for most of her life she was living a masculine lifestyle that she had cultivated for herself in a male-dominated art world, she also kept feeling like she had to make excuses for herself and look down on other women who did the same, to quiet the never-ending stare of the public eye, but also probably to quiet some voice inside herself that had always been told that what she enjoyed was wrong. And that's the internalized misogyny, babe. While her lifestyle and the way she dressed got some talk in the public eye, no one could deny that her star kept rising in the art world. Her work gained popularity, and many were amazed by how lifelike the animals she painted looked. Now on to what is considered her most famous work she has ever created. The Horse Fair, finished in 1853, is regarded as one of her best, if not the best, work of art she has created. She had already made quite a reputation for herself, but this is the painting that really made her an international star. It shows a horse market in Paris at the Boulevard de l'Hôpital, with the Hospital of Salpêtrière visible in the background. She went to this location twice a week to sketch. From these sketches, she created the scene that we see on this painting. We see the horses at a moment before they turn a corner. We see movement, we see strong, powerful animals, we see how their manes move with their run, we see their leg muscles in action. We get to see the men controlling these horses and the clothing they are wearing. We also see a lot of contrast in this work. Cloudy skies, the coats of the white horses catching the available sunlight. It is a scene of action. No one is standing still in this scene. The way it really captures the atmosphere of this moment is what captured the attention of everyone who saw it in a museum at the time. And what you can't tell when seeing it online, but what you really have to experience in person, and what most likely added to how blown away people were by this artwork, is that it is big. It is almost 2.5 meters high and a little over 5 meters wide, which in inches is... I don't know what an inch is. As I said before, Rosa Bonheur was exceptionally skilled at painting these animals. When we look closer, we see the textures of their coats, every individual hair in their manes, the muscles of these strong animals. I don't even really like horses, but I mean, this is such skilled work. This is something you see among all of her work, is that she really knows underneath the surface of what we see how these animals work. Muscles, bones, skin, fur, how it all comes together and how it makes these animals look alive, whether they are in motion like in the horse fair or standing or sitting still. The animals all look like they have a soul behind their eyes. Now back to the horse fair. She worked on the painting itself from 1852 until 1853, also doing some minor touch-ups in 1855 using oil paints on canvas. The painting was first shown at the Paris Salon in 1853, then traveled through Europe to Ghent, Bordeaux, and went on a tour through England, including a private viewing at Buckingham Palace, where Rosa Bonheur got to meet Queen Victoria. One critic said about her work, "She paints like a man," which was actually supposed to be the greatest compliment a female artist could get at that time. Right. Anyway, another writer called it a wonderful work for any painter, but as the production of a female, it is marvelous in conception and execution. Thanks. Anyway, her success wasn't only financial after this. Her name became internationally respected and she received several honors, among which Commander of the Order of Isabella the Catholic in Spain, the Order of Leopold in Belgium, and the Legion of Honor in France, of which she was actually the first woman so to be named. A bunch of titles which basically all translate to she was a big deal and highly respected not just in her home country of France, but abroad as well. After having passed through the hands of several buyers, the painting was donated in 1887 by Cornelius Vanderbilt, as in Nate Vanderbilt Archbold, yes, to the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York, where it still hangs to this day. If you live in America, definitely go see it. I don't live in America. The studio and castle of By, yes, castle, where she worked from 1860 until her death in 1899, has since been turned into a museum. She was buried in Paris with Natalie, remember, her friend. So what could be the takeaway of all of this? Rosa Bonheur made a name for herself in a time when there were plenty of female artists, but when they still weren't given the same opportunity to study at an art school. She specialized in animal painting, and her work, The Horse Fair, can be regarded as one of the greatest works of art of the 19th century. After having been a rising star in the art world, securing her top spot among the others, making her a financial international success. She dressed masculine and enjoyed a masculine lifestyle, as others would call it, with a female partner, but insisted to the public that she only did so for practical reasons. Meanwhile, her work was praised for not looking feminine. She had an incredible, undeniable skill for painting these animals, a skill that came from many, many hours of dedicated study. When she is remembered, it is unfortunately mostly for her eccentricities and not for her work. But I challenge you to be interested in both, in her lifestyle and the animals she brought to life on the canvas. Thank you for listening.